to White House strategists. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you'll be in the galley during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourself by typing your name and any contact information you'd like to share in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have questions you'd like to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. And let's all use the hashtags Rogue Reads and hashtag Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. As I said, my name is Lisa Black, and I am the author of 14 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happens to be my day job. I'm based here in Florida, working with my local police department. I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. So without further ado, let me introduce you to these amazingly talented authors. First up, we have Karen Robards, the New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly bestselling author of more than 50 books and one novella. Her new book, The Black Swan of Paris, deals with the harrowing period of Nazi-occupied France as a famous singer uses her position to work for the resistance. But when her own mother is captured, Genevieve will stop at nothing to keep her from becoming another casualty of war. Karen's snack of choice for this evening is one of my favorite, baked brie. I just have the cheap brie here, but I can eat the whole thing. So, Karen, tell us about The Black Swan of Paris.
Well, first of all, I have to say thank you, Lisa, for inviting me, and I am glad to be here. I've been in quarantine like everybody else for months, and seeing other human beings, even on video chat, is a real treat. So, hi, good to be here. The Black Swan of Paris is a little bit of a departure from anything else I've ever written. It's a thriller, which I've written a lot of. It's a love story, which I've also written a lot of. It's an adventure, and it's an epic World War II story. I was inspired to write it partly by my father-in-law, who served in France in World War II and was wounded and never recovered, really. He died before my children could meet him, but I heard lots of stories about his adventures on the beaches of Normandy, and it inspired my interest. So we traveled to France quite a bit. We walked those beaches. I actually visited the Ritz Hotel, where a lot of the action takes place, and was given a tour, was taken down to the basement where they sheltered from air raids in the basement, but the Ritz Hotel guests were given champagne and canapes and silk pillows, and their experience was very, very different from those of most Parisians during that time. But as you described so well, The Black Swan of Paris is about Genevieve Dumont. She's a singer, she's a star, she's a darling of the Nazis. What they don't know is she's also working for the resistance. Her manager, Max, is a major in the SOE, which is a special operations executive, and he has set up a spy network throughout Europe. And what the Nazis were very, very protective of the entertainers. They wanted people to think that life was going on as usual in Paris, which was the capital of everything for them. So singers and artists had special privileges. She could travel without being searched. She could go places without having any of the danger that happened to most people. So they used her as a courier and as a spy. And all this was going along perfectly. It was working until her mother, who is also a resistance operative, was captured by the Nazis. And then Genevieve had to choose. She had to choose between love for her family and working for the resistance. And The Black Swan of Paris is about the choice she made. And I'm going to read you just a little passage from it. It's short.
Okay.
You can't really think I'm a double agent, can't I? Because you've been so honest with me up until now. You don't trust me? Her voice quivered with outrage. I don't trust anybody. It's how I've managed to stay alive. And you've been coming apart at the seams lately, behaving erratically, asking questions about things you normally have no interest in. So you just assume I'm guilty? What are you going to do? Torture me into confessing? Kill me? I got away from Tuvier, and so you're here to finish the job? Don't play games with me. There's too much at stake. They were practically nose to nose now, snarling at each other. What makes you think I'm playing games? You've caught me. If I'm a double agent, your duty is clear. Turn me over as a traitor. Kill me yourself. He gave her wrists a shake. You bloody fool. If it was anybody but me standing here, you wouldn't even get a chance to explain. Tell me what the hell you were doing at 5 in the morning on the Rue du Fat. His eyes. She'd never seen that particular glint in them before. It was ugly, even deadly. She was going to have to tell him, not the whole truth, but some of it. I really enjoyed these two. This is Max and Genevieve.
Mm-hmm. That sounds absolutely fascinating. You said you spent a lot of time in France. I was in Paris the summer before last, and I love it, of course, but I could say two things. Don't stay in a B&B next to the Eiffel Tower on field day, and don't be anywhere in Paris when France wins the World Cup.
Oh, yes. Well, we were there in a heat wave, and I discovered that most French hotels don't have air conditioning. It was a revelation.
Yeah, that's true. That's when you're an American in Europe. It's kind of tend to take that for granted. So
Paris Disney doesn't have air conditioning.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I went there with my children.
Mm.
So.
Well, my husband and I did a World War II battlefield tour for our 25th wedding anniversary, which does say, something about America. But
I bet it was fascinating.
It was absolutely fascinating. The whole Normandy invasion, and it was the 68th anniversary of D-Day. Have you ever been there on the anniversary?
No, but I'd like to. I bet it was something.
It is amazing. I mean, they dress up in the old costumes, I mean, the old uniforms and things, and there are still a few vets. So there's like these 90-year-old men and women in uniform, and they're treated like rock stars. It's really wonderful to see that the school kids want to take their pictures with them and everything else.
Well, actually, the Black Swan of Paris centers on D-Day, Utah Beach in Normandy, and what those men went through is unbelievable. I mean, it was almost a suicide mission. What they were able to accomplish is incredible. It was a revelation for me doing all the research that I had to do for this book, because this book is as accurate as I can make it. It's pretty accurate, but they sacrificed everything to bring freedom to Europe and to save the world, really.
My dad was D+2 on Omaha Beach, and
really,
when he turned 75, I decided he'd never made it back, and he regretted not getting to have a cafe au lait on the Champs-Élysées. That was his big regret in the world. So I said, okay, let's go. And I was able to find maps online of the battle that he was wounded in, and they had to transport him home after a mortar strike. And it was the most phenomenal trip I ever made. I love World War II stuff.
Well, what was interesting is they had maps that they gave the German soldiers that came over to Paris, because all the German soldiers were allowed to have a month in Paris. That was their promise. The Nazis promised to them. And they had maps showing the restaurants, the brothels, the hotels, everything that catered to the Nazi soldiers. And it was really interesting. The research I did just opened my eyes to a lot.
Karen, did you watch a lot of films of that period to kind of get in the mood?
I watched films, I read books, I went back through old newspapers. I learned so much. I thought I knew a little something about World War II, but come to find out, I knew nothing. Nothing.
Were there any films in particular that really hit home for you, things that were set at that period, that time, that really influenced you a lot with the book?
Well, I tried watching some of the older movies. I really liked, of course, Casablanca and From Here to Eternity. And that one with Ben Affleck was actually, it's not an older movie, but it was very good about World War, Pearl Harbor, I believe it was. Okay. Yeah. I watched a lot of video. They had one on Netflix.
How about the music? What got you in the mood for this character, where you got into the style of the...
Genevieve was a singer, so she had her own playlist. Not the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, but she had her own playlist. Let's see, J'attendrai and Oh, I
Were you
can't
listening
think
to
of
a
it
lot
right
of
now.
like Edith Piaf? Was that
A lot of Edith Piaf. That was one of the inspirations for Genevieve, is Edith Piaf and Josephine Baker, who both worked for
wow,
the Resistance.
wow,
Right.
Actually, it was a
wow.
fascinating story. You'd be surprised what those people sacrificed. I mean, they were in terrible, terrible danger the whole time,
Mhm.
and yet they persevered.
Yeah.
I don't, you like to think you'd be that brave, but I don't
Yeah.
know if you'd be that brave. I mean, really, because these,
I- yeah.
you know what they did to women prisoners? They
Ugh.
cut off their heads. They
Hmm.
had a guillotine in the prisons,
Oh
and
my God.
women resistance members, they cut off their heads, chop, chop. Seriously. I mean,
Wow.
they were treated very badly.
And so
So,
many French during the French too.
yeah, it was terrible.
Ugh.
Exciting.
But it was an interesting book to write. Again, this is about number 54 or 55. I've lost track.
My
I've been
goodness.
doing it since I was 9 years old, people. I've been a published writer. But actually, this was a fascinating book to write because there was so much involved that I didn't know. I really liked it. It was a good book. Well, ask an impartial source, but I enjoyed it.
Good. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you for telling us all that. And
No,
we're
you're welcome.
come back to it later. But now we're going to move on to Chris. So Chris Hauty. I hope
Hauty.
I'm pronouncing that. Hauty.
Haughty. Yeah.
Hauty.
Like
Okay.
what your kids probably want to be described as, a hottie.
Haughty.
Tunes in from Venice, California. He began his professional writing career as an amazingly successful scriptwriter, but has now written his first novel, Deep State. When 25-year-old West Wing intern and ex-Army grunt Haley Chill discovers the White House chief of staff on his kitchen floor, a single clue suggests her boss died from something other than natural causes. Haley's drink of choice is tequila. Any decent reposado will do, but if someone else is buying, Fortaleza, which you might be able to get for $60 a bottle. So I'll be drinking Cabo Wabo. Haley pairs it with her favorite snack, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
There it is.
So
That looks like a good one.
Visual.
Thanks. Tell us about Deep State.
Well, Deep State, unlike Karen, it is my first book. I've written one book to her 54. So, take that into consideration. Deep State, the genesis of the book really was some frustration that anyone who's worked in the film business probably can speak to, with the amount of oversight, might be the most polite way of putting it, in terms of the creative effort. And so I have worked in the film business for almost 3 decades, and really just tried to take a whack at writing a book, and really didn't know what to expect. I really didn't know how it was going to go. But after the first day of working on Deep State, I kind of realized that I had found a wonderful and very open playground in which to do all the things, or a lot of the things, that I was never able to do as a screenwriter. The book, it's, as you describe, it's set in the White House. It's a political thriller. And when I came up with the title and the concept, and began to build out a narrative around it, the Deep State really was, it wasn't quite in front and center of our newspapers on a daily basis, or described in Senate hearings and on various cable news channels nearly as much. It just seemed like a really kind of cool, nefarious kind of, modern day trilateral commission that would be a lot of fun to explore and defy expectations. And so I really don't want to, I can't talk too much about you know, the plot without immediately giving away some important whammies. So I thought I would just kind of jump into reading a passage and then, fielding a few questions. But to set up the reading that I'm going to do, which is similarly brief, maybe not quite as brief as Karen's, but I won't try to overstay my welcome on the stage. Haley Chill is introduced in the prologue, warming up for a fight. She's a boxer, an amateur boxer, and in the military, stationed at Fort Hood. And the way the book opens with her warming up for this fight, and the way that she warms up is by running. She doesn't like being anywhere near the fight venue. So she's jogging in this thick Texas night, and she pauses to pick up a small stone, and she holds it in her hand and she clenches it tightly in her hand as she runs. And then when she's approaching the venue, having gotten sufficiently warmed up in that humid, muggy Texas night air, she opens her hand and she drops the rock, and she sees that she's held the rock so hard that she's drawn blood. And this is sort of a ritualistic way that she apparently always prepares herself for a boxing match. And as we get into the book, other challenges when it's really necessary for her to be ready for a fight. She wants to draw blood first, and then by that way be mentally prepared. And so she has this match, and she's been set up. They brought in a ringer to beat her. She's previously undefeated, and so they brought in a ringer, and she stages a miraculous come from behind victory in the third round and knocks out, essentially a more skilled boxer, just because, but Haley uses her wits to overcome that challenge. And then the next thing we know, Haley is leaving the Army. This is all in the prologue. She's leaving the military, and she's being seen off at the bus station in Killeen, Texas, by her master sergeant boxing trainer, Stanley Oaks. And so he's unhappy about her leaving. And so this is what we have here. This is the very last part of the prologue. Excuse me. She moves toward the waiting bus driver, who takes her bag and places it in the storage compartment under the coach. Haley pauses on the steps leading up into the bus and turns to offer Oaks a wave. He nods in appreciation. When you figure out a better something to all this, you be sure to let me know. Never too late, even for old war dogs like me. Haley busts a sly West Virginia grin and then disappears inside the bus. The doors close soon enough, and the melancholic Oaks stays to watch the bus depart the depot. In the years that followed, before Oaks officially retired from the Army, he often thought about the best fighter he ever trained. It was easy to be reminded of Haley's achievement. A framed picture of her in the ring with Rivas, snapped by the base newspaper's photographer, hung ceremoniously in the fitness center lobby. After a few visits to the bottom desk drawer where he kept a bottle of Old Granddad, Oaks often found himself standing in front of the photo and musing on Haley's improbable victory on that savage August night. But when Oaks finally does leave the Army, 12 interminable years on, and moves back north to Detroit, he thinks less and less often about Haley Chill and her powder blue eyes. Rarely does he dwell on that golden time until another decade hence, when one Sunday afternoon, he will be caught in a gang-related gunplay as if by a sudden April shower, and takes a 44 caliber round in his chest. As he serenely bleeds out, splayed on the filthy sidewalk just outside a liquor store, Stanley Oak's last memory before he closes his eyes forever is of Haley's otherworldly smile at the bus's doorstep. So that last paragraph is an example of one of the things that I discovered about writing fiction that was so much more fun than writing screenplays, because I could do things like that. You can't, a screenplay, a screenwriter only is supposed to write what the camera sees and what the microphone picks up, and they can't project into the future like that and just talk about a B character who's leaving the stage. But on the other hand, that idea, you know, just sprung to my mind as I was writing it, and I'm pretty sure what I was thinking about were the things that what's often done in film comedies, where like at the end of Animal House, they'll tell you, you know, what happens to these characters. Yeah, the summaries of you know, what happens to Bluto and things like that. You know, he becomes the mayor of New York or whatever it was. I can't remember, but anyway, so any questions?
So Chris, can you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've written in the past for TV or for film in your previous life?
Yeah. You know, I've, like I said, I've been doing it forever and continue to work, though I consider myself primarily a novelist now, happily so. Deep State, in fact, was optioned by a TV studio, and I'm slated to write the pilot and create the show. But you know, I think one reason for my resilience and fairly lengthy career in Hollywood was by writing almost everything. So, and you know, I probably had 30 to 35 paid jobs and about, I think, probably 6 or 7 credits. So there's a bunch of stuff that didn't get made, but I wrote, the first produced credit was Homeward Bound 2, which is about talking dogs and talking cat.
You didn't tell me about Homeward, Lost in San Francisco, of course.
Exactly right.
I know that it's a great film.
You know, I'm the hero of many, you know, I guess there would be, that was in 1996, so a little 8-year-old then, that's however many years ago, you do the math, but like I'll go into Hollywood meetings and like a 35-year-old executive will like start enthusing about my first credit, Homeward Bound 2. So I did that and thought I was lining myself up for a lengthy career in family entertainment. And about, you know, 3 minutes after that movie opened, PG movies, you know, suddenly became unwelcome in Hollywood. They wanted the move was away from, you know, like a dedicated family movie to more what they call 4-quadrant. You want to appeal to, you know, kids, women, young adults, everybody. And so I had to reinvent myself, and I wrote, I just did a total 180 and wrote a very kick-ass historical gladiator movie. And this was, God, I think it was probably 1998 or so. And up to that point, there hadn't been a decent gladiator movie in 20 years. They were always those cheesy movies that you could see on Saturday mornings. And so I thought, what a great, you know, like with the advance in cinematic technology, a pretty great gladiator movie could be made. And so I wrote this thing, and it was very loosely modeled. It always helped me, especially when I was first starting out, to have a paradigm in mind. So my story paradigm was Shane, the movie Shane. So you probably would, if you really thought hard about it, you would recognize it in the script. But anyway, it came out really well. And my agent put it out on the marketplace, and we started getting lots of activity. and this happened like 3 times in my career. The day that we were going to actually go out wide with the screenplay to sell it, I went to the newsstand, and there still were newsstands in those days. And there was an announcement in Variety newspaper for Ridley Scott's Gladiator, which is exactly what my script was called.
Oh no.
And there was just no one was willing to go up against Ridley's movie. But to this day, I could be confused. My script could be confused for the, oh, I've forgotten his name now. It's not David Peoples, but it was one of those guys who wrote Gladiator. 2 guys wrote Gladiator. But
Chris, what about a mashup with Homeward Bound and a Gladiator movie?
Well, believe me, Ace, I tried things like that. I put that same, you know, I'm a firm believer in cannibalizing your orphans. And so I took that, I put that script in the future, like way in the distant future. You know, it was in the past, so it can still work in the distant future. And then I turned Gladiator into Gladiatrix, and it was about a female gladiator. But that kind of gives you an idea, Ace, of like, I mean, I was the gamut. I probably had the most success in writing female characters, ergo Deep State. And you know, one of my other credits was Never Back Down, which is a mixed martial arts kind of young people Karate Kid type of movie. Then I wrote some sniper movies. So really just kind of everything but straight up comedy. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, now we need to move on to Ace.
Can we remind everybody, if you have a question, you need to type it into the chat. I don't think some know that the chat should be typed in. So I have like 7 or 8 people on Facebook, and so I will be asking questions across after we get through.
Okay. Ace is a New York Times bestselling author who has been nominated for numerous awards, including the Edgar 3 times. He's written 9 books in the former U.S. Army Ranger Quinn Coulson series and continued Robert B. Parker's iconic Spencer character after Parker's death in 2010. Ace is a former investigative journalist and SEC football player. In his new book, The Revelators, Sheriff Quinn Coulson, shot and left for dead, now has revenge on his mind. With the help of his new wife, Maggie, rehabilitation, and sheer force of will, he's walking again and eager to resume work as a lawman while tracking down those responsible for his attempted murder. Ace's favorite drink is Bullet Bourbon, but I'm making do with Jim Beam. So let's hear more about the Revelators.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. And again, I want to echo Karen's statements from earlier about thanks for having us on to do this, because it is just the strangest time in my life where we're just cooped up. And I think for writers, you know, we're somewhat social creatures where we like to hang out with each other and talk and have drinks. So this is really a kind of a welcome oasis in the middle of all this craziness. So cheers. I'm not drinking Bullet, I'm drinking a beer, but cheers. So Revelators, this is actually book number 10 for me. I can't believe I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. I started this series about the same time that I took over writing the Spencer books. And these books could not be more different. I imagine some of your viewers right now know the Spencer books, set in Boston. And here I'm writing about where I live, which is Oxford, Mississippi. And Oxford, Mississippi, I know this is going to be shocking to you, is very different than Boston, Massachusetts. And it's a good time, not necessarily a good time, but it's an interesting time to be writing about the Deep South. You know, I do write about political issues. I do write about social issues. I do write about racism and corruption. And God, we're in the middle of the thick of it right now. And so it gives me an added incentive to really get after it in these books and to write about what's going on down here. And I think, you know, really just, as we were talking, Chris mentioned earlier, the movie Shane, I think that's really kind of what I'm doing at the most basic level, is I'm kind of carrying on that tradition of just an honest hero in a dishonest time. And we are living in probably the heightened of dishonest times in America. And I just think that these kind of characters are really important to write about moral figures, people standing up for what's right. I mean, my character isn't that different from Shane. My character is not that different from Andy Griffith. I think that really, you know, my books that are set in this fictional Tibahaw County in Mississippi, in some ways are writing about Mayberry, although I probably, you know, have more of an R-rated version of Mayberry than that show. But it's about, you know, it's about decency, and it's not just about the hero and the white dude with the gun that takes on the people. It's about the whole community. And I think when I first started writing these books 10 years ago, what I wanted to do is I wrote a very basic story, which is about a man returning from war, coming home and finding his town in shambles. I mean, it's the same thing, you know, going back to the Odyssey. And what I wanted to do in these stories is show the community growing and changing, showing out the relationship between Quinn and his mother and his sister and how that world is changing, but to show you how different our world is changing. When I first wrote this, one of the things that Quinn had to take on was this racist militia group that had infiltrated his town in Mississippi that had just corroded this community. And he was the honest lone gunman coming back to town to take care of business. But when I was writing this 10 years ago, these were about characters that were hiding in the woods. They were afraid, you know, they wouldn't come out in public. They were hidden from view. Now where I live, you know, in Faulkner's hometown, I can stare out my window right here in my office, and I see people, you know, supporting the Confederate monument and marching around with AK-47s. So people that used to be doing this kind of stuff in the woods now are in the town square. So this stuff, you know, sad to say, I think has more relevance than ever right now. And it does give me a lot of fuel to want to continue these stories. You know, of course, I want to be entertaining. I want to write, you know, stories that you don't want to put down, but at the same time, there's a lot to talk about. And I think that's really what the best of crime fiction is all about, which is to take on social issues and to expose them and talk to them and hold them up to the light.
Cool. And you
So,
don't
but yeah, the 10th book, The Revelators, will be out actually tomorrow. So this is kind of my debut launch on with you, Lisa. You and I got to be really good friends doing a festival down in Florida. And so this is kind of a nice thing to be able to start talking about it. Although no book tour this year, you know, this is where I'll be traveling this year here from my office.
No. And you don't have anything to actually read for us because you said there's a supply chain issue.
It's just such a strange time. I had you asked me recently to pose with the cover of my book, and I had gotten some copies of a book from a bookstore to sign, and I had to send them all immediately to the bookstore in Phoenix to get out of them. Everything is so backed up with distribution that we're actually waiting on books to get to their bookstores. I think everything's going to be fine. I think it's going to be okay. But if I were to read to you right now, I'd have to be reading off my computer, which is not as much fun.
Okay. I have a question. The criminal network in your book, which goes all the way up to the governor, how long has this been simmering through your books? And did you always have like an end game plan in mind for it?
I did. Thanks, Lisa. Did I give you that question? That's a great question. It sounds like I gave you.
No, I made it up. I made it
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. So, yeah, no, I think, again, with the expectation with crime fiction is somewhat what you saw with episodic television years ago when they were networks, where everything was self-contained. You could not write a book that was linking in with other books. You know, you might have a character who carries over, but usually the way of thinking, especially in New York, was not to have stories that connect, because you didn't want a reader to come in and be lost, that kind of thing. Now I think people are thinking a little bit differently. I think people now are thinking like, long story arcs, like watching a movie on Netflix, you know, something like that. We're seeing how everything goes. So that's what I wanted to do. One of the things I was really influenced by, one of the stories that I just loved, was the show Deadwood on HBO. And I loved how you started that show with the building of the actual town, and you saw the town being erected. You saw Deadwood taking shape. You saw the characters coming in. You saw the characters leaving. There were grievances that weren't affected, until 2 years down the line, 2 seasons down the line. So that's what I wanted to do 10 years ago. That's what I wanted to build. And so I don't know, is that successful? Is that what readers want? Could I have lost a few readers because they were confused? They didn't know I don't know, but for the writer, it was enjoyable. And for me to build this, so what your question is about the criminal network is, yes, this is a story that has started about this criminal network that's based on the Dixie Mafia that existed years ago here in Mississippi and Tennessee. And it's about eventually, taking this on and about the disassembling of this criminal enterprise. And this really, in this book, number 10, it's the end of that story. I think the Quinn Coulson series is going to be very different, looking at books 11 and 12 and onward. But this long story that's been, germinating since the original story in The Ranger, this is the end of it.
Wow.
But of course, I've got to make money, so there's more to come. So
Yeah.
don't worry. There's more crime. That's the thing about living here in the Deep South. There's never, we're not really having any kind of shortage on corruption or horrible things happening down here. So you can guarantee I'll find some more story ideas.
Ace, does your franchise character, does he age? Are you careful to, like, if this is 10 books in 10 years, guessing,
Yeah.
Does he age a decade?
I do, Chris. That's a really good question, because in writing the other series, writing for Spencer, everyone knows Spencer doesn't age. I mean, I wish I could be like Spencer, but as the years go on, now I remember writing him and thinking about how do I think like an older man? And now I've been writing Spencer so long, now I basically Spencer's age, and now I'm going to surpass Spencer in age. But for Quinn Coulson, I want him to age.
Yeah.
And so when he first got the first book, he got back to town, and he's just left the military. He's 29 years old. He's coming back home, and now he's in his 40s, and he has a family, and he's setting down roots, and he's doing this kind of thing. So yeah, in those books, I am very careful of showing that the way things have changed, and also just the climate. I mean, this, like I mentioned early on, things that I wrote about 10 years ago now are heightened. I mean, things that we used to write about, issues of race, or things that we're talking about right now with Civil War monuments, the battle between the Old South and the New South. That's all in the forefront of my mind when I'm writing these books. So not only did the characters change, but also the characters go with the times.
Cool.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, let's move on to John Land, because I don't want to run too short of time. John Land is the USA Today bestselling author of over 50 books and has won a long list of awards that I'm not going to list here because it would take too long. Recently, he's taken over the Murder, She Wrote series of books, the Margaret Truman Washington, D.C. mysteries, and has begun to work with Heather Graham on a sci-fi series. Just for fun, he writes nonfiction true crime books and a movie, the teen comedy Dirty Deeds, filmed with Zoe Saldana and Milo Ventimiglia. His most recent work, and with a guy this prolific, it can be hard to tell, is Strong from the Heart, in which Texas Ranger Caitlin Strong and her lover fight on the front lines of the opioid crisis. John loves a perfect margarita paired with his deep in the heart of Texas barbecue chicken. And I have tequila. And John, I know from my work at the police department just how bad the opioid epidemic has been. So tell us how Caitlin comes to deal with it.
Well, I think personal stakes are the key to any great thriller, any great book. And in Strong from the Heart, Caitlin gets involved because her surrogate son ODs and almost dies. But at the same time, 2 books ago, Caitlin suffered a very serious concussion, a blast percussion injury when she was too close to an explosion that she set off. So she has lingering pain, migraine-like pain. So she's on Vicodin, and she is experiencing being addicted firsthand, even as she's trying to track down the force behind the drugs that nearly killed her surrogate son. And I was so interested in some of the things Ace was saying, because it was almost like the perfect lead into what, to my books. Because essentially, as I was listening to Ace, I was thinking of the notion that so many modern day thrillers are essentially postmodern or modern day Westerns. That's all they are. Think about Jack Reacher.
Mm-hmm.
He rides a train or a bus instead of a horse. He shows up in a town, he cleans it up, and then he gets back on the horse, the bus, or the train, and off he goes to his next stop. When you look at great movies, Shane gets mentioned all the time as the basis of basically a lot of thriller characters, the dark hero, the savior psychopath. You think of also movies, and that, by the way, this term savior psychopath was coined by Jack Schaefer, I think, who wrote Shane. And the book is much different than the movie. So
Wow.
when I conceived Caitlin Strong, I was thinking of Shane. I was also thinking of films like the Spencer Tracy classic, Bad Day at Black Rock. That's a Western. A guy comes to town looking for his old friend from the war. And he finds all this corruption and he can't find his friend. Somebody killed him. And of course, Spencer Tracy has one arm, and one of the classic scenes in the movie is when he wipes out about 7 people with his one arm.
One arm.
So I fell in love as a kid with Westerns, The Magnificent Seven, High Noon. I mean, the list goes on and on. The Outlaw Josie Wales. So the notion of writing a female gunfighter fascinated me because there were a lot of male modern gunfighters, Jack Reachers, but there weren't a lot of females, if any, when I started the Caitlin Strong series in 2008. The notion of a female action hero, but you can't use a Navy SEAL because you can't be a woman in the Navy SEALs. Women can be in the special forces, but they cannot serve in combat as a Green Beret or in Delta Force. They can't serve in Marine Force Recon. They can't serve in the pararescue unit of the Air Force. So, but they can be Texas Rangers. And Caitlin Strong is a 5th generation Texas Ranger. And in Strong from the Heart, Lisa, as you were alluding to better than I could, basically the war on drugs comes to Texas and they mess with the wrong Texas Ranger. And what I try to do in all the books, but when and I've visited Texas an awful lot. I am, the greatest thing that ever happened to research in my mind was Google, but I have been to Texas, and one of the most amazing things is when you witness a Texas Ranger work, it hasn't changed. There might be a big argument going on in a bar and the local police are trying to straighten it out. They can't do it. Guns are people are threatening each other with guns, and the door opens and a Texas Ranger comes in and everybody quiets down. Everybody just backs off. Now, there have been female Texas Rangers on which I based Caitlin Strong, but to create credibility, I made her a 5th generation Ranger. So she's accepted into the ranks because all her forebears, her great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather, grandfather, and father were all Texas Ranger legends. These books are totally unrealistic. They're way over the top. Caitlin Strong has kills more people in one book. In Strong from the Heart, she kills more people than all the Texas Rangers in the 20th century combined. But they're gunfighter novels. And that's where the fun is. She basically always in Texas, so she doesn't travel. She's not the horseman riding in on the range as we, like in High Plains Drifter or the opening of Shane. She is only in Texas, but her travels take her elsewhere. And I had so much fun. You alluded to, Lisa, from your police background, the opioid crisis. And I wanted to find a new take on the opioid crisis. And I had done a book with one of the foremost DEA agents of all time, Dan Adario, who lost his own oldest son to opioids and then committed his final years. He's 90 now, and for the last 20 years, he has fought the war on drugs all over again, trying to convince people there is a way to win it, and we're not doing it. So I had all this research about his theories, and not just theories, but facts of how our government supports the drug industry, as we've seen from the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis, the government is as much complicit as the pharmaceutical companies by enabling them to do what they've done. And when this book, Caitlin Strong does what we have not been able to do, she does in fiction what we have not been able to do in fact. She gets to the bottom of who's really behind the war on drugs, and she brings them down, some with a gun and some with her wit. Now, I do readings a little bit different because when people ask me, should I buy your book? Well, I like your book. You're a good writer. Do you suck? Instead of answering those questions, what I do is I say, what's your favorite number? So Lisa, what's your favorite number?
23.
23. Let's open to page 23 of Strong from the Heart and read it. This is the John Land test. Open a book to any page. If that page grabs your attention, buy it. If it doesn't, don't. That's what I tell people. Page 23, Strong from the Heart.
Okay.
You sure about this, Ranger? Mariana Alonso said to Caitlin after bringing from her office, to her office, just out of sight of the barricaded entrance, the 6 students that the ICE officers had come to collect. Caitlin ran her hand through the hair of a trembling girl who looked all of 10 years old, then used a tissue to wipe the tear stains from the cheeks of a boy who was all of 9. As sure as I am that if we don't do something fast, ICE might breach the building. What happens then? This is still Texas, and I'm still a Texas Ranger, ma'am. Just ask your sister. I did, after she told me you were coming. What'd she say? To stay out of your way. That everything I'd heard was true. Caitlin bristled. I wouldn't put much stock in those stories. The press is prone to exaggeration. Alonzo nodded. She told me you'd say that too. Caitlin felt the boy whose cheeks she'd swiped clean tug at her sleeve. Are you going to save us from the bad men? She knelt so they were eye to eye and laid her hands on his shoulders. What's your name, son? Diego. I'm scared. Well, Diego, let me show you what happens to men who scare little kids. The bald ICE agent named Orleans smirked when Caitlin emerged from the school entrance with the 6 children in tow. School principal Mariano Alonso bringing up the rear. Cameras clacked and whirred as she brushed aside microphones thrust in her face. That wasn't so hard, was it? Orleans said once Caitlin reached him, her chargers gathered protectively behind her. Good thing you came to your senses. If it makes you feel any better, I hate this part of the job as much as anybody. I really want to turn the page myself. I got to tell you, because I really want you to see what Caitlin does to those ICE agents. Now, Chris, you'll appreciate this. Chris Hauty. In the book, Caitlin dresses down the ICE agent. She's come up with a way to get the kids out of their custody, but they're not backing down. And her 7-foot giant protector, Colonel Guillermo Paz, rides in with dual M4s. But for the movie, for the pilot that I wrote, there's no way you can introduce a character the audience hasn't met to save the day.
Right.
So Caitlin in the pilot shoots 2 of the ICE agents in the leg. And then there's this great moment that the producer who has it says is going to sell it. They've all got M4s trained on her. There's still 4 of them left. And they've got M4s trained on her. And she's just got her Sig Sauer 9mm. And she goes, 2 of you are going down. You'll get some shots off. Only question being, which 2 is it going to be? And that, believe it or not, is really the way Ace has probably run into people like that over the years in his research. That's a Texas Ranger. Always was, always is. That's the way they are. And that's where all the legends come from. But as you can tell, I have as much fun writing the books as I want you to have reading them. And in closing, I'd say, when writers at Thriller Fest, virtual Thriller Fest going on right now, when writers at Thriller Fest ask me or otherwise, what's the most important thing to being a writer? If I want to be a writer, what do I have to do? And I used to tell them, tell a great story, beginning, middle, and end. Tell a great story. But now I change that. I say, have fun telling a great story. Because if you have fun telling it, the reader's going to have a blast reading it.
That's an excellent point.
Okay, so I have a question for you with the bigger than life kind of character like that. I mean, every one of us writes bigger than life characters, right? But at some point, you also have to keep that reality base there. So how do you make her fragile in her own way? I mean, flawed or whatever.
That's a great question. And when I conceived her, it was because I wanted to create a hero who was defined as much by her flaws as her strengths. And I think the answer to that question is all thrillers, and everyone in this call is a terrific writer. I've reviewed a lot of your books, and so I'm familiar with your work. And I can say that all great thrillers have two strands. They have a physical strand, which is the plot, and they have an emotional strand, which is the core of the characters. John D. MacDonald, who created Travis McGee, was once asked, "Mr. McGee, you always say, tell a great story. Well, what is a story?" And MacDonald looked at the kid, it was a young writer, and said, "Stuff happens to people you care about." So the reason, Caitlin, and that's a great question, by the way, Chris, whoever asked it or posed it. The reason the audience buys the over-the-top nature of these books, the reason why they don't put them down, even though that when they become almost James Bondish at times, is because they're grounded in the personal relationships in Caitlin's life. The push and the pull, flaws. What I've done with this series is inverted the model. In the classic Western, the woman is trying to get the man to settle down. In this series, it's Court Wesley Masters who has the two sons that Caitlin is surrogate mother of. Okay, Court Wesley Masters is a badass in his own right. He was special forces in Vietnam. So, but the grounding of her raising those two kids as she still maintains her repute as a gunfighter is what defines her and enables me to get away with having her shoot an awful lot of people in every book.
So ZJ Supor, who is in the room, ZJ, you could pose your question. Just unmute yourself or I'll unmute you. Go ahead. He had a question for you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. So John, do you develop your character out of the plot, or does the plot develop out of your character?
Wow, great question. And I start with a big idea, and I'm not an outliner. It'd be interesting to know who among us are pantsers and who among us are outliners. So I have a general idea of what I'm writing about. I have a MacGuffin. But to give you an example, the opening scene of Strong from the Heart is my homage to the Andromeda Strain, where overnight, within minutes, an entire town dies, 300 people. And they're discovered by the mailman, who's then found wandering in the desert by Homeland Security. When I killed the whole town, I had no idea how they died. But I wanted to write that scene so much, I figured I'd figure it out later. And I had a notion of where I wanted to go, but I wasn't sure how to get there. I find that when I do too much research in advance, I write the book around the research. So what I found is I do my best writing when I do the research that I need, and I don't write the book around what I've learned. I find that to be a very important thing. So I would say that the characters evolve or devolve and grow out of the story. That's the polar opposite of something like Elmore Leonard, who is basically letting his characters dictate the action. I will say this though, I have no idea where my dialogue comes from. I hear it in my head and I type it, but it feels real to me. So it's like they're there. I write from the inside out, not the outside in.
How about the rest of you? Karen?
I start with characters. The plot comes next, but I thought it was an interesting question. How many of us are pantsers and how many of us are outliners? Anybody? I personally am a pantser. I've never had an outline in my life. Well, I do it. I do it to sell the book, but I never stick to it.
You're an outliner, Elisa?
Yeah. I have to have, it's not a detailed outline, but I have to know, I know how it starts and how it ends and all the characters and who's going to die and why and who killed them.
No, I don't do that at all. I just start and it takes me where it goes.
How about Chris and Ace?
Well, for me, I don't think that there's probably a screenwriter in Hollywood who's making a living that does it by the seat of his pants. You need to you need to tell them the story before you can sell it. Then you need to write a treatment version of it. So there are so many steps before you actually write the final product that, so I've gotten used to it, and I find it pretty valuable. I mean, my outlines are 3 or 4 pages long of bullet points of kind of where the plot is going, what needs to happen, if it feels balanced, if it feels structurally sound. And then, you know, almost like improv, if you go to an improv club and they throw out an idea and the characters, I don't do character profiles before I write. The characters grow out of the plot. So does that make me inside out or outside? Am I an innie or an outie? I can't figure this out. But, you know, writing's got to be fun. So, you know, it has to be like John said, it's always fun. I never have a problem sitting down to work. So if everything is answered, you know, in a treatment or an outline or whatever before you write, then you're just blowing things out. It has to be you know, a great day is when you have 3 or 4 just great kick-ass ideas in a day of writing discoveries. Like, how the hell am I going to get my character out of this situation? So that's how I do it. What about Ace?
Yeah, for me, I do a little bit of both. I think you have to kind of sometimes call an audible if the story's not working out the way you want to, but I will echo pretty much everything you guys say. One of the things I hear from a lot of amateur writers when I do conferences, they talk about, you know, what's going to sell, what's going to be something that I can write that is going to engage the audience, almost looking at it like it's a mathematical equation. And for me, it's just got to be what is entertaining me, you know, what is it for me that day, and what is exciting me to get to work, you know. And if I go back, and I guess what John said earlier is it's got to be exciting to me, and if it's exciting to me, that's going to be exciting for someone else. But I try to have a rough idea of where I'm headed. I don't have a very detailed outline. I don't have I wish I did. I mean, I don't scoff at that. If I had a definite,
it would be easier.
I would be a lot easier. I'd be glad to do it. But I kind of give myself a little bit of a freedom, and I know who the characters are. I kind of know the situation. I might know where I'm going to end up. That may change, but it kind of can go from day to day. I mean, right now I'm about halfway through a new Spencer novel, and I know for the next 9 chapters, essentially what's going to happen, basically. But I don't want to pigeonhole myself. I want to know, you know, if I kind of want to go in a different direction, that's okay. And it's more just gauged, kind of going back, I guess, what Chris was talking about, which is just kind of like improv and feeling what's working for me. But that's the fun of it. And if this stuff isn't fun, you know, I think that's what separates us from people who want to be writers, who like to be writers. They're looking at it of, you know, how do you do it mathematically? And for us, you know, it's
There's
all
no
about
mathematics.
yeah, and that's a terrible way. I mean, it's got to be fun. And if not, God knows, none of us would be in this crazy business. We wouldn't get into this if it wasn't fun for us. And that's the joy of it.
So here's the question about going forward. How are you going to put COVID-19 in your books? Or are you going to skip over, write futuristic novels from now on, or write in the past?
God.
It could be the new Andromeda strain. Just think about that. It was unleashed on the world to wipe out half the population. There's all kinds of things you can do with COVID-19. It will probably figure in a book or 2 at some point.
Yeah, watch
Who
Outbreak.
knows?
My next book is coming out this coming January, and I guess I'm doing the first or second pass edits, but I was able to squeeze in a few line changes that will reflect the pandemic, and it doesn't affect the plot all that much, but you know, it worked into it. I wove it in a little bit, and then I'm also about halfway through book 3, and in that book, it's set in West Texas, and initially when I was conceiving the story, the Permian Basin was awash in money and high oil prices. So I'm, you know, like Ace said, I called an audible, and it turns out that the pandemic and bad oil prices work out better for my storyline. So
I mean, can you imagine though that like It didn't used to be you could wear a bandana over your face when you went in a bank.
You can rob a bank now.
You know,
my
um,
bandana's right here, and it's difficult to be a private eye during a pandemic because you don't want to get around people. You don't want close talking. You don't want, it's the worst kind of situation for a private eye. Private eye is all about getting close to somebody. It's about, so I mean, for me, for the Spencer book, I'm not addressing it. But for the next Quinn Colson, because it happens in the real world in real time, I'm going to have to. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but it's you know, interpersonal communication, which is our stock and trade, is going to be limited.
you know, Chris Goff, I'll say Chris, I use your last name because I don't want to confuse with Chris Hauty. When I often say to people that thrillers hold up a mirror to the world, to the country or the world, and they reflect what people are thinking of. They grow out of a certain era. For instance, Robert Ludlum, his books became huge because of Watergate. The paranoid conspiracy novels, movies like 3 Days of the Condor became huge after Watergate. We didn't trust anyone anymore. Then Reagan came along, who became big? Tom Clancy. Jingoistic novels became huge. Techno thrillers were born during the Reagan era. But then the Soviet Union broke up and thrillers died. Nobody, I came close to losing, I lost Blaine McCracken, my series hero, because no one was buying thrillers anymore because there was no enemy. And then 9/11 happened. And now we had a whole new, because remember, the original thrillers respond because of Nazis. All the great Alistair MacLean novels and stuff like that. Now we had new bad guys. We had seen in reality what we had written about in fiction. And that spawned the likes of the great Vince Flynn, who we lost much too young to prostate cancer, Brad Thor, Brad Taylor, the list goes on. The modern day military thriller where there is someone out there, and basically it comes down to James Bond. Someone is out there trying to destroy the world or change it or take it over. And there's one man, Scott Horvath or Mitch Rapp or whoever that may be, who can save it. So the answer to this COVID thing is it is inconceivable that it won't change fiction. The question is how? What kind of books? Because let's face it, right now there are probably 1,000 ideas, 1,000 writers out there writing the Andromeda Strain. Actually, it just came out. The sequel to the Andromeda Strain did just come out recently. But you are going to see all kinds of different takes on how science, not just germs, but what if this were created in a lab? What if it happened then? So yes, it's inevitable because his thrillers hold up that mirror. And right now in that mirror is COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, but that's a whole nother thing that Ace was starting to get into.
Cool.
Interesting.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating and so much fun, but I think we're out of time. So if we want to kind of stick to our time schedule, even though I could ask questions here all night, but so my little goodbye thing. Thank you so much to our wonderful authors for sharing all that great information and the personal stories. Thank you to our readers for joining us this evening. Don't forget to order books that you've heard about and join us for next month's Rogue Reads, which will be August 10th.
And
thank you.
Are you going to say?
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
It was nice meeting all of you.
Yeah, nice.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I'm just gonna end the meeting.